G'day and welcome back to Drafted, talking all things SuperCoach Draft. It's your boy Dossie here, joined by my good friends in SuperCoach Draft, Lekdog and Patch, back again for the final episode of Drafted before the season starts because, guys, it's going to be draft day any day now, Lekdog.
It has come around very quickly. I think I've got 2 drafts this weekend, maybe 3, and I'm currently in one as we're recording. It's draft season. It's all happening.
It is all happening. Patch, how about you, mate? Have you got some drafts coming up this weekend? I mean, I think, so we're recording Wednesday night. This will probably go up sometime on Thursday just to make sure that we get enough info out there for draft weekend. But heading into this weekend, the practice matches are in full swing and it's time to draft.
Oh, it's Christmas time. Honestly, like, it's just the best time of the year. Why would you ever want to be, the middle of November, looking at cricket? Who cares about that? Like, it's all about this weekend. It's all about drafts. Get excited, everyone. Get hyped.
Very keen. We've done, obviously, all our rankings episodes now. They're a couple of weeks old, and immediately there's about 1,000 adjustments we have to do. Of course, if you do want to see all our latest articles on draft that Lekdog's been putting together and the team at SuperCoach have been putting together, a lot of top 100 ranks, adjusted draft boards, all the likes, and the thing that we're going to be talking about today as well, our mock draft that we recently did with a bunch of members of the SuperCoach community. Head over to Code Sports. You can check all those articles out. I'll put a bunch of the relevant articles as well in the description of this show, whether you're watching on YouTube or on your Spotify or Apple devices. Now, guys, if you've been enjoying the draft episodes in the preseason, please leave us a rating, review, or subscribe on YouTube. Give us a like, comment, everything that you can do to support the draft platform. With obviously new stuff this season, so really keen and thanks for your support. We know there's lots of people listening out there, so I appreciate all that. Now, guys, what we're going to be going through today, I want to go through our adjustments first and sort of a reminder for anyone that has not been keeping too much of an eye on but have their draft this weekend. Let's talk about some of the recent injuries and then some of the older injuries that people need to keep an eye on. So, Lekdog, we talked about your ranks throughout this preseason series. I want to get your thoughts on how far you shuffle these guys down in your ranks and what we think about. I'll just run through a bunch of the recent injuries because there is a lot and there might even be more after we record. We're recording during the game tonight that's going on between Richmond and Collingwood. So these are just the ones that we've had so far. Zach Butters, going to miss the start of the season. Tom Green, iffy as well. Callum Mills going to be out till round 4. Mark Pitnet's not going to start the season. Brodie Grundy today, we don't know the severity of that injury. Just keep an eye out on that as well. Hayden Young's re-injured a hammy, going to miss the start of the season, at least round 1 is what we've been hearing. And then Ed Richards, touch and go for round 1, but that's just a few. We might have even missed some there. There's probably...
Brodie Grundy out with, maybe out with a knee, we don't know. Mark Pitnet will be missing for a little bit. Rowan Marshall, who knows what's going on with him. Honestly, we could let you go and and I could go to the pub for a beer and then come back and you'd still probably just be wrapping up.
Yeah, so Lek,
it's insane.
What are you doing with these names? How far do you shuffle them down? And it's obviously dependent on the player and the injury.
Yeah, it depends on each one. I mean, they all get a negative bump if they're injured. They get a positive bump if they're TDK, a slight positive bump because of the lack of Pitnet for the first potentially 6 rounds. It's tough, right? So someone's going to take these guys around where they probably were ranked anyway. So, for instance, Zach Butters I had ranked as my 4th top 4 sort of player. I bumped him down to 9th or 10th because we're still not sure on what that injury actually is or what it looks like or how long it'll affect him. I'd be willing to take the risk at the sort of the back end of a first round. I do suspect he probably goes earlier than that in most drafts. He probably still goes in the top 6. Callum Mills, I never had really in my rankings considering, so I kind of thought he might get injured, and he did. Tom Green did get a relatively big bump for me just because we know he's going to miss at least a couple of weeks in the real stuff. We don't love that. And then Hayden Young is so recent, I haven't even been able to bump him down because it's literally happened as we've covered it. I didn't even know about Brodie Grundy. So you do take a hit to these guys. I guess the risk with a Butters and a Green, I'm still willing to take them in the first for Butters and second round for Green, just because when they're back, they will produce really well. It's just how long you can cover them. And also the midfield, pure mids do lack in depth. So they do get bumped, but you can still feel okay about taking them.
How do you judge someone like Sammy Flanders, who's just kind of been under a weird cloud all preseason? We've heard very little out of the Gold Coast as to whether he's fit or if he's training or if he's in rehab or like how bad the injury is. How do you judge someone like that who obviously, dropped below the ton once last year, rolled gold, would be, top 5, top 10 in pretty much any draft if he was uninjured? What do you do with that, just void of information?
Yeah, I had him 26th when we did the top 100 a few weeks ago, and that was largely due to question marks over the role, combined with the injury. 26 is where I landed him, and the fact that we still haven't heard anything and we still haven't had any confirmed reports one way or another, I've just bumped him back again. He's 36 on my top 100 now. That's like, if you're doing an 18-team draft, that's end of second round. If you're doing a 12-team draft, that's end of third round. And I understand he will probably be taken earlier than that by people who look at his average from last year, but just too many question marks there. I'd rather take a safer, ideally a pure mid pick there, maybe a really high-end defender if there's one available, instead of taking the risk with Flanders.
Yeah, I guess my philosophy is always let someone else draft the injured guy, especially if there is, largely a lot of question marks. And this is coming from a guy who was very happy to draft Sam Flanders, even knowing that he did have those sort of injury concerns at the time that we did this draft. And I picked him up at 8th overall. So I was happy to go there. But yeah, the closer that we get to the season, I'm certainly wouldn't be as comfortable. As you said, we haven't heard a heap. And I think the only thing that I've heard out of it was Dimmer Hardwick was on the Your Coach podcast produced by the AFL. And from what he said, I don't know how long ago they did record that, but they were saying that, his back hasn't responded essentially, and that they're going to make sure they look after him. They hadn't mentioned anything about, essentially a timetable, but yeah, he's one to watch. Some older injuries, if you have been living under a rock in your drafts this week as well. Kitty Coleman, he's not slated to return for a while as well. So he's another guy that I just wouldn't be drafting at all unless you're super deep, you've got big benches, and you can sort of stash those injury players away. And I still wouldn't be doing it until later in the draft. And Adam Treloar is a guy who you actually factored his injury into your rankings already. So, but yeah, that was
he has dropped significantly again, though. I'll tell
you. It was so long ago. I can't even remember half of these injuries. So make sure you do check out those articles, though, as we said in the link in the description, because yeah, we've already factored a lot of these things in, but we thought we'd touch on them at the top of the show. But I want to talk about some other adjustments in the positive direction. We've heard a lot since we last recorded the ranking shows about, different players playing different roles, and those guys can sometimes, and of course, who's filling in these injuries, as you said, they can sometimes affect where we pick players as well in draft. Are there any that have stood out to you that you've sort of risen them right up the rankings in particular?
Yeah, look, not a lot have jumped super high in the rankings, as in to the top of the rankings, but guys have jumped up from where they were. So guys like Liam Duggan, guys like Will Day, who I had a lot of question marks over his body and stuff. He's apparently not missed a session this preseason. He's going to play pure mid. A few obvious ones. Jai Simpkins, another guy that I probably underestimated how many forward line options we actually do have outside of the big sort of 4 or 5 guys. Jai Simpkin, his performance in that preseason, the Indigenous game was elite, so he got a big bump. And then Jack McRae, I was pretty conservative of him in the first place. He had 85% or whatever it was centre bounce attendance. He gets a bump. But then your boy Tom De Koning, let's talk about him. Whew. Is he going to be the number 1 ruck this year for SuperCoach, Dossie?
The number 1 player of all time, I would say, this season, just putting up huge numbers. Yeah, I'm not going to go as far as that. But I have been high on him all preseason. I had him number 3 in my rankings, and this was before we knew what the Mark Pittonet situation. Number 3 ruck, sorry, of course, not number 3 overall. Say,
good lord, goodness
number
me.
3 in the rucks. I've still got Gawn and Cherry ahead of him, but I've held firm with that rank. I've just still got that patch last season. Speak to Patch about this, but I've still got that little patch in my mind last season where he just went absolutely bonkers, just contested possessions for days. So I'm massive on him. Patch, though, speaking of patches, what is your thoughts on TDK?
I'm just worried that, especially with kind of injury concerns over Curnow, that, you know, like Pito being out kind of allays that a little bit, but he'll spend time forward this year. He'll spend time back. He'll just be. I think he's a good draft option. I think, you know, you'd be pretty happy with him, but someone will go him real early. Someone will jump in the second round on him, and I'm happy to let that person take that risk. I wouldn't be touching him until the third or fourth round at the earliest, and by that stage he's gone. So it's just, he's one of those guys that I don't rate as highly as a lot of other people do. I think he'll be good. I don't think he'll be a bad selection, but I'm not jumping on him as early as other people will, and I'm more than happy to let them take that risk. I'm happy not to have that buy-in. I don't have any stocks in him this year, classic or draft, and that's fine.
I will say, I'll put my Carlton hat on here. We have been, as fans, demanding that the club get a backup ruckman for the inevitable hit net injury, because there's been concerns that we don't have any backup ruck. We don't have any backup ruck. So the good news is that it's Tom De Koning and it's Harry Mackay and it's maybe Jack Silvani, but he's a defender now and I don't think they've got any intentions. Oh, mate, I would love if Hudson O'Keefe was the solution to these problems. I think he's a jet, but it's not going to happen. It's TDK, at least for the first 6 or 7 weeks.
Has anyone got Alex Burkov's number?
Yeah. Well, I picked him up, just a flashback to and a bit of a sneak preview of the mock draft we're going to talk about. I picked him up at pick 17. I had to get my boy way back then, so I got him in the second round, to your point, Patch, and I don't know how far he'll slip now, especially with this hype coming around him now. Some of the guys that I have risen up my ranks as well, just some defenders with that mid sort of time flagged. So you mentioned Duggan as one. I'm also pretty high on him going up now. I had to sort of see it to believe it, and I've seen enough already, even if that is just some grainy intra-club footage as well on a YouTube live that I may have watched the other day. Harry Perryman playing a bit more midfield. We're seeing that. Apparently, we are recording during the game, but we're seeing that a bit as well. And then a Trent Rivers, I quite like, risen him quite a bit up the rankings as well. Where do you sit, Patch, on a Riley Sanders, who we've talked about Treloar being out? We've talked about, we haven't talked about Bevo, but what are your thoughts on
Do we need to talk about Bevo?
Riley Sanders?
Like there have been reams of words written about Bevo's unreliability from a fantasy footy perspective for years. And we've got, say hypothetically Ed Richards misses round 1, Treloar is out, Bailey Dale is, say, out, and then, Marcus Montepelli has a cold. Riley Sanders could still start as the sub. He could still just be in the sub's vest despite all of that. And they have a centre bounce of James Harms and Lockie McNeil and some bloke Bevo dragged off the street 3 minutes before the game started. He's one of those guys where I'm like, he's a good footballer and he could score really well, and I can see a world where it happens, but somebody else will be more keen than me, and I'm willing to have somebody else be more keen, and they can reap the rewards, and I'll sit back with Alex Neil-Bullen, and after 3 rounds of Sanders scoring 110, he goes back to the VFL for 2 weeks and is then sub and then plays back pocket, and meanwhile Alex Neil-Bullen has scored 85 every week, and I'd rather that than deal with Bevo. This is not Riley Sanders slander, this is Luke Beveridge slander.
Yeah, and it's probably a point to the salary cap hype as well. If you do have, most people play a bit of both, I think, these days. And if you're just hearing it, a lot of these guys we're talking about have that salary cap hype as well, because roles, work both ways in both formats. Let's talk about one last guy.
I think to that point, that's my biggest piece of advice to anyone drafting this weekend. Take the salary cap hype out of it and let other people take that run, take that risk, throw that name up. And unless they're Caleb Daniel, just put him on ice and just leave him be. I think Caleb Daniel's the only one with salary cap hype who really justifies it.
I want to talk about just one last guy before we move on to the mock draft and look at some of those results and some of those learnings. But Sam De Koning in the ruck, brother of Tommy, my boy Tommy there. But look, he didn't have an amazing showing in the trial match that we have seen, and that's all we're going to get on for if you're going to go for the draft this weekend. how much do you adjust him in your ranks? Patch is shaking his head, but Lek, where did you land on him in your final sort of rankings as a defender eligible player?
Yeah, he's not in my top 100. I'm looking through the current draft that I was active in, and he went in the middle of the 8th round. So I can't do maths very quickly. That's about pick 80, maybe pick 90. I think that's a reasonable swing, but honestly, I'm relatively conservative in terms of the players I look at in drafts. Around that mark, you've got guys like James Warple, Finn Callan, George Hewitt. I'd probably just rather back in the known floor guys. It's an interesting prospect. If I could get him a little bit later in drafts, but the hype has probably killed that, I'd look at him. But also, he might just not be a very good ruckman. So that's a real possible outcome of all of this.
Yeah, we haven't seen it yet. Let's get into our mock draft results. So as I've mentioned, Lekdog did a write-up of this. Now, this was a very fun mock draft. Thanks to everyone who was involved. So we did this with community members in the SuperCoach community. Had a bit of a mixture of some classic players and traditional draft players as well to not get a nice little mixture of people which you generally get on draft day in any draft. So for those wondering, our league settings that we drafted in this one were 4 defenders, 5 mids, 1 ruck, and 4 forwards. We did have captains off as well, just in case that affects where your rankings stand or where these players went. And just for the people involved, of course, there was the 3 on this show here. We had the Phantom and Al Payton as well from the SuperCoach team. Then there was Hef from the Keeper League. We had Stevie Fizz from the Draft Doctors. We had the overall winner of Classic last year, Joven. We had Pig Mentality from Dr. Supercoach. We had the GOAT, Moreira's Magic, on board for this one. Abs Magic as well for his spuds. And DR from Supercoach Sawplay. So all these guys, thank you so much for being involved in the draft. But let's talk about some of the results and some of our learnings. I'm just going to be going through the first round. I might even get through the first 2 if I'm going quick enough, and then we can just discuss some of our top picks and some of the lessons learned, because I think the lessons learned for me was pretty interesting. So pick 1, it was the Bont, then Butters. Obviously this was pre-injury. Tristan Sherry went 3, Max Gorn 4, Nick Dacos 5, Harry Sheasel 6, Zach Merritt 7, Sammy Flanders 8, Jason Horne-Francis 9, Caleb Sarong at 10, Lockie Whitfield at 11, and Jack Sinclair at 12. So that was the first round. Then we did a snake draft, so the Phantom was picking at 12. He had the first pick in the second round. Goes to Isaac Rankin, Lockie Neal, Luke Ryan at pick 15, Jack McRae pick 16, Tom De Koning at 17 to yours truly. Then it was Andrew Brayshaw at 18, Rowan Marshall 19, Tim English 20, Tom Green 21, Josh Dunkley 22, Isaac Heaney 23, and Dane Zorko 24 to round out the first 2 rounds. Guys, maybe let's just talk about those first 2 rounds first. Lekdog, any surprises? Obviously, Zach Butters is not going to be as high as he went, but any changes, any surprises, any picks you sort of were shocked at? What was how'd it play out?
Yeah, look, the names are all relatively in the right areas for me. What I was surprised was probably the order in which they went. And so in my article, I talk about this, but across the last 4 years, the average amount of players that go 110 plus in SuperCoach is 18. Last year it was 20, and there were 16 players that went 105 to 110. So there was 36 players who averaged 105 points a game or more. Of those 36, only 25% weren't either a pure mid or a pure ruck that are available to be selected as a pure mid or a pure ruck this year. So my focus in drafts is to lock in either that super upper echelon ruck or those super consistent pure mids. And we saw a lot of defenders, a few forwards. Rankin went early in that first round or the middle of the first round as a forward. I just think from a purely getting points on field perspective, it's rucks and mids should be the focus. And I appreciate the logic that you want to get a really good forward or a really good defender. But I think by the end of the draft, we found that defenders and forwards were actually deeper than we thought, and you can find those points later on. So for me, it was just I was just a bit surprised to see some of the forwards who went before these like gun mids that have the potential to be 105, 110 plus.
Patch, were you similar thoughts for yourself, or?
Yeah, once I kind of stepped back and had a look at it, I think, it was certainly the priority for me was trying to get just as many points on field. And then by the time, because I'd picked two, so I had Butters and then had Heaney on the way back. And by the time Heaney had gone, there weren't a lot of guys that kind of really appealed to me. So I then pivoted into the forward line. And I think that was something I was really glad that I did, because I saw there were a few guys that kind of punted forwards. Abs picked the rest of his team before he picked his first forward. And it was kind of like getting really bottom of the barrel really early, I felt, in forwards. I felt there wasn't a lot of depth there at all, so I'm kind of glad that I dipped in there pretty quickly, but certainly wasn't like the highest priority. I was certainly trying to fill kind of all the lines relatively evenly, and I feel like that gave me a pretty good side. But yeah, I was kind of surprised at how big the drop off was for some of the forwards as well.
I think the interesting thing for me, and I'm not picking on you, Phantom. I know you're listening, but Phantom had the last pick of the first round, the first pick of the second round. He took Jack Sinclair and Isaac Rankin, a defender mid and a forward, which I understand the logic of wanting to sort of show up either end. But the guys that went after those picks, Lachie Neale averaged 120 last year, Luke Ryan averaged 117, Andrew Brayshaw averaged 110, Tom Green, he wasn't as injured at the time, Dunkley, Heaney, all these guys, all these pure mids, Cripps went after those type of players. And just my personal philosophy is I'd much rather have the guys capable of going 110 plus in the mid, 105 plus, and then sure, I might miss out on the forward that averages 90, but I should be able to find a forward who averages 80.
Yeah, it's a fair call. I think in his defence, he did, just to defend my boy over here, the fans.
Oh, no, it's just an observation.
He is listening. Hello,
he did pick up Sam Walsh, I think, at value, who's looking like, he potentially might play earlier than we thought he was going to play. So picked him up at nice value. So look, if you're listening, fans, I did the right thing there and defended your honour. But
you don't lose the draft on draft night. You don't lose your league on draft night, by the way. Everyone's team looks pretty good on draft night. It's what you do afterwards.
That's it.
It is. I think as well, and Lekey pointed it out very nicely in the piece that went up, I think it was this week at any rate, was that the ruck run started really early and, was kicked off by Dossie nabbing Tom DeConey at 17. And then we had Ron Marshall go at 19, Tim English at 20, Toby Nankervis at 21. So we had 6 rucks off the table by pick 25, which was 4 more than I expected to have gone by that point. And then we kind of had a bit of a lull with it. But I certainly found that very interesting that the ruck run started very early and some people just couldn't resist getting in and making sure they grabbed one when, Lekey picked up, who did he pick up? You had Jared Witts late and then partnered with Ned Moyle, and Abs picked up Riley O'Brien, in the second last round. And if you're getting Riley O'Brien in the second last round, you are laughing. You're doing very well because that means you get Merritt, Brayshaw, Dan Houston, Hayden Young in your first 4 rounds, which is what Abs did. And I think that looks much better than, say, a Rowan Marshall or a Tim English or a Tom DeConing and then 3 other guys.
Yeah, I think to Lek's point earlier, like with the top mids and top rucks, I think if you do miss out on those top guys, I'm so happy to punt, not the mids, but to punt those rucks. Just get them later in your draft. And I was kind of hoping as well to start that ruck run. That was part of I also wanted Tom DeConing in my team. I'm just, enamored and I thought, this is a mock draft. I want to see a team that I like on paper as well. And he was my man. But I think in general, I was noticing, I was trying to call their bluff. I was almost thinking about just drafting an extra ruck because I'm looking at them sitting back smug, getting all the great picks, and not taking those drafts not taking that ruck till super late in the draft. And they totally benefited. So, maybe your league mates aren't as kind and they might stash one away on the bench and stitch you up. But it is a valid strategy, the old punting the rucks.
That is a risk, but I've seen people do that where they take 1, 2, 3 drafts in a ruck, and then everyone goes, right, well, I'm not trading with you, and you can't field those rucks, so you're stuck with 2 good rucks on your bench you can't do anything with. So I think most people won't dog you, and I think, well, if you're in like a 12-team league, you're always going to get a good ruckman. If you're in an 18-team league, you're going to struggle. Jordan Sweet, Matt Flynn might be your R1, but I just wanted to shout out my boy Patch, who's here on the pod at pick 71, and I've really come around since this draft. I've done a few more drafts, and he's going around this mark. But Darcy Cameron, and then I sort of dived into his numbers, averaged 126-10 the year across 5 or 6 games as the main ruck at Collingwood. No reason to see that sort of stopping. There is value. Lloyd Meek went in the 8th round, Darcy Cameron in the 6th or 7th round. Like, there's plenty of value late for rucks. So, yeah, I'm happy to... If I don't get, Max Gawn or Tristan Jerry, I'm pretty happy to wait.
Yeah. I really like the value late for defenders as well. Where I kind of didn't pick one up early, but you end up with guys like Carl Amon going, pick 98 or I think it's 96. You get guys Mason Redmond, Kane Farrell, Kitty Coleman. I know is injured, but around that pick 100, 120 mark.
Lockie Ash, 137 to yours truly.
There was some
like you said, there's so much value late.
And I think you can just kind of get rid of them.
Too, Dossie.
Yep.
You can really just get rid of them early, or just not pick them early rather, and then just pick up some value late. So that was one thing I thought was pretty noticeable.
One thing I thought was interesting as well, just a trend that I've now seen across a few drafts, is there's a few pure mid players who we have no reason to sort of really hate. Ollie Wines, Matt Crouch-esque type players that are going really late. And they're guys who could average 100 points a game or pretty close to, or should average 100 points a game. But there's just a few of these types of guys where everyone's just kind of ignoring them. And
always. Yeah.
In these drafts, it's just like value. It's like, yeah, you don't have to like Matt Crouch's game, but if he's playing, he's going to have a lot of the pill. That's what he does.
Yeah. It's guys like you, much happier, a lot of drafters, including myself sometimes as well, you're much happier taking the Finn Callahan guy than you are taking the Stephen Coniglio. They'll just go way later in draft. You're enamored by the breakout or the taking the game to the next level, and you take them earlier. And then, these guys are often just sitting there on a platter at the end of the game. Mostly the old guys, let's be honest. Yeah, it's always the old dudes.
But, I'm happy with Tim Kelly at 119. I'm stoked with that. And, they're all across the draft. Wines went a few picks before that. Jack Viney at 141, Rowbottom at 142. There's just so many midfielders that will just slide because people aren't interested, and then you're laughing.
I'd say that's probably my biggest lesson learned, and I think we'll move on to just some of our favourite picks or questionable picks just after this, before our final thoughts. But my probably biggest lesson was around the mids, and to your point, I think I tried this strategy of smashing the mids, but I did kind of go positional early. So I think Lex already mentioned it. I would just hammer away some of those mids early because I sort of left it a little bit, and then I tried to sort of catch up, and I was really going hard on the midfielders. But then it's sort of knowing when to turn and when to know where the value is elsewhere. And I think the way that I really want to look at it heading into draft day is just assess at each position. Obviously, you've got your ranks, but just assess at each position where you think the top dogs are, and sort of look at the depth a bit more. I was kind of just looking at, players available, but really look towards the depth. And the moment that the depth starts dropping off, you sort of just switch to the next position. So that's kind of where I landed on it. But interested to hear some of you guys' favorite picks in the draft. I'll kick it off with Lek.
Yeah, I think I mentioned Darcy Cameron before as one of my favourite picks. I really like Harry Perryman, who went in the hundreds. Now we're recording this. We don't actually know how he's performed in the practice match. I took Matt Crouch at 106. I like the midfield sandwich, which was my tactic, which is a really good one on top. Then kind of fill out the rest of the team and then sandwich in towards the end there with some other solid mids. So I think they're the guys that present value. And I really liked Phantom. I know I potted him before, but Tom Liberatore is like the forgotten man every year, and I think he went at pick 60 or something. And no Treloar. They need some leadership in there. I don't think Matt Kennedy's going to come in and steal too many points off a guy like Libba. So that's just one. It wasn't particularly late, but at pick 60, I mean, you're stoked having Tom Liberatore there.
Yeah, nice one. Patch, you got any solid picks that you liked in the draft? And I actually do want to do a couple of questionable picks too, so maybe prep that while we wait. I want to stitch up a couple of people.
I've got it in the article, mate. We'll pop shot Al, that's fine.
Poor Al. I gave me the very nice shout out for DCAM at pick 71. Kieran Briggs for the GOAT Selby Pereira's Magic at 81 was, I think, one of the picks of the draft. I think Briggs has a lot of upside this year. And, you get in a bunch of guys beforehand, and then you get a ruck who can also still average 105. If things go right, was, huge from him. Willem Drew at pick 130. He's now apparently picked up a niggle and a little injury, but at the time that was a wonderful pick, I think, from you, Lek, as the bottom of the sandwich. And Jace Burgoyne as well from Selby is another one of those guys who may well pick up defensive eligibility and be a really nice defender option, but... I thought he was very good. And I'm going to give myself another shout out for Blake Acres at pick 170 170, my last pick of the draft, which I'm very happy having him sitting on my bench. I feel stoked with that.
I might just shout out before the Sam De Koning, this was before the Sam De Koning hype, DR picked him up at pick 125 in the 11th round. So I think, if you had your draft nice and early, DR would have been going okay there. He was definitely on the train before there was anything about him and sort of moving into a ruck role. That was sort of one that I quite liked. I also liked, it might have been considered maybe around where he should have gone, but Tommy Powell going as well in the 10th round, 110th overall. I quite like that from the reigning champ in Classic, who named himself Cooper Bell Pepper after his boy Cooper Bell up at the Suns. That is Joven, so shout out to him as well. I thought that was a solid pick. Let's move on to some of our stinkers. Who have you got there, Lek?
Yeah, sorry, Al. I'm going to put you on the pod and in the article. So Al took McGovern and Sicily with pick 46 and 51, and then DR took Tom Stewart at pick 53. And Stewart looked all right last night in loose in defence, but those three players are just three players I don't want any piece of, and I don't want any piece of them in that 40 to 50 range, not even close. Sicily is probably the biggest offender of that, in my opinion. Just they've brought in two jet defenders. Maybe it frees him up and allows him to be a looser player, but in all likelihood, I think it just means he gets flung around the field a bit more. And then McGovern dominated last year. Massive scoring, massive output, played, I think, every game. But every single thing that could possibly go right for him, which historically doesn't go right for him, went right for him. And I think replicating that is too tough. So I'm out on the three old defenders.
Patch? Who had a stinker? Who just a one-off stinker maybe, but who
just
who had
a one-off stinker. I reckon there was a really big reach on this guy in the second round, Tom De Koning. I think it was like I know you had to do it for the bit, but I do think Tom De Koning was such a big reach, and while it did set off the ruck run, I just think it was just too early. Like the guy, like Andy Brayshaw went the pick after Tom De Koning. And then you've got Tom Green, Josh Dunkley, Isaac Heaney, LDU, all coming after him. And I just think that I haven't drunk the Kool-Aid like you have on TDK, but that was the pick that really made me go, okay, all right, guess we're doing it.
Well, that hurt.
Love you, boo, Illy.
The Ralph meme there. I actually just quickly, I did see a couple more positive picks that I want to shout out before any negative ones. But
let's be positive, baby.
Bailey Humphrey at 175th in the 15th round. So that was Abs Magic, was all over that early days. And then another one, this was before the hype. That's what I'm sort of saying as well. So these guys will probably go a lot higher now in draft day, and we've adjusted them a little bit up as well, I'm sure. DR picking Hugo Garcia at pick 164. Now, whether or not that's a season-long amazing pick, but to start the season, I think it's looking like a pretty solid pick there as well.
I will give Riley Thilthorpe a shout-out as well. You did pick Thilthorpe at 104. This isn't just me trying to make it up to you. I And I thought that was a pretty good pick, considering forwards were really starting to dry up at that stage.
I'm going to pot shot the Phantom myself. Pick 109. He had Kitty Coleman. This was when he was already announced as injured. I don't know if that was an auto pick, but let's give the Phantom one on the way out. Guys, any final thoughts heading into draft? Any final advice you want to give to people having their draft this weekend, next weekend, whenever it is? Final words of wisdom, Lekdog.
Yeah, so you don't lose your league on draft night, but you can set yourself up in a good position if you draft well. You don't have to do a full draft board, but just have an idea of sort of the ranges that you're willing to take players, and have a rough idea of like, you want to go a forward for a mid first, and then a mid, and then, you know, a good defender. Just have a rough idea. But yeah, the main thing is just bloody have fun.
Have a bit of fun. Patch, you got any more words of wisdom for us?
I think trust your gut. I think it's just kind of like, at the very least, you know, if you trust your gut, you go early on a guy and he explodes, you're riding the high. But if you have a gut feel and you're like, oh, Harley Reid's sitting there, I really want Harley Reid.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'll do the safe thing and pick, whoever else you end up picking, and then Reid goes 110. You're kicking yourself all year. And I think that's part of the fun is just ride or die on your guys. And if you've got someone like a Tom DeConning who you're like, I need to have this guy, reach on him, you'll have more fun. And, you might get blasted for it. It might all end in tears, but at least you go out on your terms. And I think that's a more entertaining way to do draft than it is to be like super conservative and super boring. And you kind of end up with a team of guys you don't really care about. And then, you just kind of pot around and you middle around, and that's fine. Like, enjoy the picks you're taking, as well as making sure they're the right pick. And often the pick you enjoy is the pick that will score the most points, and that's a natural decision. But yeah, just like, don't be afraid to kind of back yourself and get dogged down in stats. And, this guy scored 97 in round 21 last year. Does that mean he's not going to be good enough? Or like, just don't overthink it. Just trust your gut when you need to.
You're speaking my language. I was going to say the exact same thing. Nobody ever gets snaked. You just didn't go early enough. You just didn't pick your boy early enough. Don't be snaked on draft day. Pick him yourself. Get Tom DeConning in the second round. You get him when you want him. And I also picked Harley Reid in the draft for those wondering at home. Had to get my boy. Check out the full results on Code Sports of this mock draft. And thanks again to all the people in the community that joined in on that. All the famous people in the SuperCoach community for joining in. That was awesome of them to take part in that. I'll link all the stuff you need in the description below for draft day. We hope you have a great draft, and this will be the last episode of Drafted before the season starts, but looking at doing some as well for your waiver pickups, because as Lekdog said, you don't win your league at the draft. You got to keep a keen eye on those waiver pickups. Make sure you get your free agents and waivers in.
Aside from that mock draft, I did win that at the draft. I've won that one at the draft. We don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, sure.
No, every other draft, you don't win at the draft.
No, but that one, yeah, okay.
That one, yeah. I did it. I won it.
Fair enough. All right, and you can also trade as well throughout the season. So maybe some trade advice, some waiver pickups along the way as well. Thanks, guys, so much for listening as well. Thank you to Lekdog and Patch for joining me on this pre-season ranking shows and this mock draft review as well. It's been a pleasure, lads. And good luck in your drafts as well.
Thank you, mate.
We shall see you again. Fare thee well.